Hi, I'm Becky Davis with City TV, and welcome to Inside Santa Barbara, the city's only news magazine show. We bring you up to date on the city's most significant issues, projects, and events. For decades, the area between the Mission and Foothill Road has been problematic for motorists, cyclists, and pedestrians alike. In our first story, we take an in-depth look at the main problem areas and discover what's being proposed to make the streets safer for everyone. For residents living in and around the Mission Canyon corridor, traffic safety has been a hot topic. For years, community members have tried reaching a consensus about how to resolve many of the transportation issues, but without resolution. Now, a new plan is being proposed, headed by the county and a community-formed group called the Concerned Citizens for Safe Passage.
It actually started with a conversation between some folks at the Mission and some folks at the Natural History Museum who have to continually contend with a lot of tourists, mostly busloads of fourth graders from all over Southern California who come to study the Mission, and then inevitably the educator involved or the teacher will say, okay class, after we have picnic on the lawn of the Mission, we're going to walk over to the Natural History Museum. And of course about that point somebody from the Mission comes running out and says, don't do that. It's not really a good way to do that, just to walk the several hundred yards between the two facilities. Get back on the bus and drive over them.
The general idea is to address the miscellaneous traffic problems, the pedestrian problems, the bicycle problems, the turning problems that traffic has from APS onto Mission Canyon Road. At the same time, integrating the area that's really currently very jumbled and fragmented into a cultural heritage destination point.
The Mission Canyon Corridor Community Consensus Proposal began in 2013 as a 2-year concept-level planning process funded by a Caltrans planning grant. These grants promote transportation and land use planning projects that encourage community involvement and partnership.
So the community wanted some improvements made, and they asked for the county and city to collaborate on improvements to get pedestrians and bicyclists through this corridor better. So then we, as staff, went and sought grants to make that happen. And we were found out that there's a program through Caltrans called Community-Based Transportation Planning Grant Program. So we applied for that grant as a partnership with the city of Santa Barbara, and we're successful. And it provided the planning money we needed to get this project started up.
While the Caltrans planning grant did allow for concept planning of this project to begin, it is not enough to fund the project itself.
This is going to be a very expensive project, and I think everybody needs to realize that it's probably going to be built over a period of years, if not decades, and it's going to have to be a phased project.
In an effort to develop the best project, the city partnered with the county to hold a series of workshops, engaging the community to provide input.
The public workshops that we've had for this process have been extremely helpful. We intended to listen to the public. What is the public's concerns? Don't start with solutions. What are your concerns? What are the issues? We asked them what's important about the corridor. What do they love? What do they not like? What is important to fix and what is important not to touch. And with that information, we were able to put together what we thought was a minimum project that the public was saying, this is what can be done. Based on what the public said, we see a consensus proposal that we believe could be approved, and it includes creating a walking path on the westerly side of Mission Canyon Corridor from Laguna in front of the Mission all the way up to 192 Foothill.
It's tight in here, and so the trick is you got to bring the roadway over. A couple of these trees are going to have to be removed, like this, I think it's a sycamore here. And then you do a pedestrian pathway and then a bike lane on that side. In the end, it enables the roadway to feel just a little wider without doing a major roadway widening that could have more impacts to the aesthetics of the corridor.
The public workshops also identified other challenges.
Many members of the public want us to do more than what's proposed. Like for instance, APS and Mission Canyon Corridor. Some people have said we need to fix that intersection. And we know that from what the community says, there are issues. But we also know that if we try to adjust that intersection, the controversy will probably be such that we won't do anything. And that is what we're trying to do, is just something. Let's do something the community can embrace, boards and commissions can approve, and the council and ultimately the Board of Supervisors can agree that we can fund something. What is that minimal proposal? That's been our objective.
Another challenge lies in navigating the preservation of the rich history of the area.
I think what's being discussed primarily among the residents certainly is the fact that this is a very rustic, rural location that wants to remain as innocent as possible of overbearing development and civilization. We are very protective of the romance and the rustic flavor of this area. This ruin behind me dates from the late 1700s, and the waterworks behind that ruin are the reservoirs that fed the culture that evolved in the early 1800s. This is precious land with many historic artifacts that still exist today.
Although a consensus has been reached, there's still much more that needs to be done before implementation can begin.
So the next step would be to go to the boards and commissions, Historical Landmarks Commission, the Planning Commission. The county staff is also taking it through their commissions, leading up to the city council and the supervisors. And along the way, hearing more public comments, getting more feedback about the minimum proposal, with the ultimate goal of saying, yes, this proposal is doable.
Another challenge on the horizon is finding additional funding for the project, if and when it's given the green light.
We don't have any money set aside for this project. It continues to be controversial. So the challenge is to first get a project that is approvable, and then agree between the county and the city that we're committed to that project, and then try to get the funding to do it.
The committee realizes that ultimate implementation of any of these solutions is going to require a partnership between the public and private funding side of the world. Some of this certainly would be funded by public available money. The county and the city have identified potential sources at state and federal level where that might be possible, but we also realize that a lot of it will have to be funded privately.
After decades of proposals, it's going to take a great deal of community involvement to see this project finally come to fruition.
I think that what's really important here is that we continue the community dialogue. This has to be a community solution. This is not one or two people deciding what's going to happen. This is a collective effort of all of us within the entire community, because we're standing on ground that's so rich in terms of its cultural resources and our understanding of how Santa Barbara began. We're standing at a point a few hundred yards away from where the mission is, from where our original water source is. A lot of who we are as Santa Barbarans started in this corridor. So we want to be able to share that not only with our community, but we want to be able to share that with the world, who comes here by the thousands every year to visit this very rich historic place.
You know, we're really grateful for the community involvement. We need everybody to continue to be actively involved with us to make sure we get the job done right.
For more information about the proposal, visit safepassagesb.com. Now we turn our attention to transportation. In our next 4 segments, we'll examine the rules of the road and show you what it takes to get from point A to point B safely. First, we begin with the recent sting operation held at busy crosswalks around town.
In order to remind drivers of the rules of the road and the importance of pedestrian safety, the Santa Barbara Police Department has joined forces with the California Highway Patrol and the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department to conduct multiple crosswalk enforcement stings.
This is a particular strategy that we're using today is the efforts that we used in a long time, but we're working with other agencies, and what we want to do is make this a higher visible event. We want everybody in the South Coast community to be aware of our enforcement efforts, to be aware of the education efforts that's happening here. And by doing that, it allows us to have more motor officers, more staffing to actually have more of an effect in our enforcement today.
Obviously, pedestrian violations and people who don't yield to pedestrians aren't inherent to one area. Everybody has this problem. It's not just Santa Barbara City or the Goleta City, it's everywhere.
According to the 2011 Office of Traffic Safety rankings, Santa Barbara ranked second out of 102 California cities of similar size for highest number of pedestrian collisions. City transportation has worked to lower the high number of collisions by installing new pedestrian signage, median refuge islands, and other devices across town to increase pedestrian visibility to oncoming vehicles. But even with improved signage and visibility, some drivers still fail to properly yield to pedestrians. And that is where enforcement comes in.
It's to educate the driver that when the pedestrian's out in the crosswalk, they need to pay attention, slow down, and stop.
There's the 3 E's of traffic. There's education, enforcement, and engineering. And so this is a classic example of all three working together. What we'd like to do is to educate people about crosswalk violations, their responsibility when they're driving the vehicle, and also their responsibility when they're the pedestrian.
As part of the planning stage, the Santa Barbara Police Department, in coordination with the transportation planners, determined which locations would benefit the most from enforcement. These intersections included Calle Palo Colorado at State Street, Anapamu at San Andres Street, De La Vina and Canaperdito Street, Santa Barbara at Sola Street, and Cabrillo at Corona del Mar. Each location has a marked crosswalk with no traffic signal.
The traffic section at the police department works closely with the traffic engineers, and so we communicate a lot about what's happening in the city as far as collision rates and complaints that we get from the citizens. So after discussing it with the traffic engineer's office, we decided that this was probably the best locations to do this thing.
According to state law, drivers are required to yield the right-of-way to a pedestrian when crossing a street. During this round of enforcement, 144 citations were given at the 5 Santa Barbara and 4 Goleta locations. The Calle Palo Colorado at State Street location brought in the most with 49. During the exercise, decoys and officers noticed that many of the violations share similar characteristics.
Some of them are speeding, some of them are not paying attention, and some just don't care.
This operation's set up where we have cones marking the location of the vehicle. So in other words, 200 feet from either side of this intersection that we're at right now, there's a cone. And the decoys who are stepping out are trained to know that they'll step out before a vehicle reaches the cone. The reason for that is that they have a good perception reaction time. A lot of the people that we're stopping today, they're in violation, they're driving near our decoys, they're not paying attention to what's happening, and a lot of them are telling us we didn't see the person come out in the street.
To safely interact with pedestrians, law enforcement officers have these simple tips for drivers.
When the pedestrian's walking across the street, sometimes it's blocked, so you've got to pay attention to the cars next to you on the right and left of you, depending on which lane you are. And if they slow and stop, obviously there's a reason that's going on. And if you can't see that, then you need to slow down and stop too to see what could be happening. There could be a bicyclist coming across, there could be a pedestrian, or somebody might have had an accident.
What we'd like to get across to the motorists is that driving it's a big responsibility, and when we're in our vehicles, sometimes we get distracted by different things that are going on, things that we're thinking about that are going on in our life, but when we enter that car, it's a dangerous vehicle. When we're operating our vehicles, we need to be very aware of the traffic, we need to be very aware and attentive to everything that's going on the roadway.
Drivers aren't the only cause of collisions. Pedestrians need to take the extra step and remain alert as they cross busy intersections.
Pedestrians have a responsibility as well as vehicles when they're in the roadway, so they always need to be careful, they always need to be looking both ways when they cross the street, and they can't enter the street until it's safe to do so. So to step out into the street is one thing, but to step out into the street when it's dangerous, they can be at fault if a collision occurs.
Being aware is the big one. Is the big safety tip for me, is knowing my surroundings, what's going on, making sure I see the vehicles come from my right and from my left, and moving slowly. You're not gonna stop? Oh, we got another pull over there.
The Santa Barbara Police Department says it will continue to enforce crosswalk yielding compliance and educate the community to keep Santa Barbara's streets safe for everyone. Stay tuned, we'll be right back with more Inside Santa Barbara.
We are in a serious drought, so it's time to get water-wise. Did you know that in Santa Barbara County, 60% of residential water use is used in gardens, and half that is wasted through overwatering and runoff? Take a day off from watering your landscape and only water your thirstiest plants, such as your lawn, no more than 2 days a week. Gold is the new green in Santa Barbara County. Your water provider is here to help. Visit waterwisesb.org for more information.
Welcome back. Crosswalk yielding compliance is important, but what if there's no stop sign or even a crosswalk? Up next, we look at the city's process for stop sign and crosswalk requests from the public.
Santa Barbara is considered a walkable community for a lot of reasons. We've got fantastic weather, a relatively compact downtown, and spectacular scenery. But there is one other character trait our town has that not many others do that makes it particularly pedestrian-friendly.
Santa Barbara is a walkable community because we have all the right ingredients. We have a beautiful place, we have the ocean, the mountains, but more than that, we have a city that was laid out before the car was even invented, which means it was laid out for walking.
But the advent of the car and the roadway changes it necessitated haven't always been kind to the pedestrian. Traffic engineers have long tried to strike a balance between the needs of the different modes of travel, utilizing all means of testing and surveys to accomplish that. In Santa Barbara, they've also relied on input from another source, you.
Members of the public are the best resource we have for understanding what improvements we need to the public road right-of-way. And oftentimes we'll get requests for crosswalks or stop signs at certain locations.
Normally what people are looking for is, sometimes they're looking to slow traffic down. Sometimes they're just having a hard time getting onto the main street from the side street that they live on, or they're trying to cross the street.
Public Works staff say they receive about 50 of these types of requests a year. Requests are evaluated using two main criteria.
If there's enough side street traffic that there's causing a lot of delays for people trying to get across the street or onto the street, or if there's a significant collision problem at the intersection.
But depending upon the issue, stop signs aren't always the best solution. For instance, stop signs are not an effective way to slow traffic down.
And that's really what stop signs are not intended for. They're really intended for a right-of-way assignment device. In other words, letting people know whose turn it is to go. And as well, there's risks with installing stop signs. We know that stop sign installations can cause an increase in rear end collisions. And as well, some people do run stop signs and that can end up in collisions as well. So we have to be really careful that we're addressing the problem with installing stop signs.
With this in mind, Public Works uses a variety of tools and techniques to create custom solutions for each intersection that improve safety. This is important because no two intersections in Santa Barbara are exactly the same. There are instances, though, when alternatives to stop signs aren't feasible. Such was the case at the intersection of Anapamu and Laguna Streets.
This intersection's been on our radar for a while just because of the collision history here. But a few years ago, it tripped the magic number, which is 5 collisions per year, to justify an all-way stop. Normally what we would try to do is try to mitigate that before we do an all-way stop by improving sight lines. Sometimes we can move the parking further back away from the intersection in order to improve sight lines, and that usually corrects the problem. You know, we like to keep traffic moving when we can, but on this particular street there's some really large historic trees on the street, and the trunks are so large that people have a hard time seeing around. And because the trees are such a valuable asset to the community, we had to install an all-way stop to fix the collision problem.
So if you travel an intersection in the city that seems less than safe, call the Traffic Engineering Hotline at 560-7518. Your input is a valuable resource that helps staff evaluate all the options.
We're constantly trying to develop new ways of making that experience positive for the pedestrian and the motorist, where the motorist recognizes, okay, here's a crossing, I'm going to yield, and the pedestrian feels safe doing so.
What we strive for in the city of Santa Barbara is for all modes of travel to get around easily and safely. We want people to be able to choose how they get around, and we want people to be able to get to where they want to go safely.
If you'd like to make a request or provide any transportation-related feedback, call Traffic Engineering at 560-7518. If you've traveled Milpas Street or Cabrillo Boulevard recently, something new may have caught your attention, and that's exactly what it's supposed to do. Up next, City TV takes a closer look at one of the newest tools being utilized by the city to improve pedestrian safety.
If you want to experience Santa Barbara, there is no better way than by foot. But there are some intersections in town that aren't exactly pedestrian friendly. They don't have a signal or a stop sign, they're large, and the traffic is moving fast. But now, at some of the busiest such intersections in town, there is a new device being employed to give pedestrians some much-needed attention. They're called rectangular rapid flashing beacons.
It is an enhancement to make a pedestrian more visible and provides just an extra attention for motorists or bicyclists that a pedestrian is in the crosswalk.
So far, the devices have been installed on Milpas at Ortega and Yananali Streets and Cabrillo Boulevard at Mason and Bath Streets. Using a rapid flashing beacon is simple.
You first begin by pressing the rapid flashing beacon button, and then we're going to keep scanning to make sure. I see that I have stop compliance here. Then, when it's safe, I will proceed. So the trick is, just as if you're crossing any intersection, you're always scanning to make sure that the cars are yielding to you so you can safely navigate across the street.
Drivers and bicyclists are required to treat pedestrians using the beacons the same as they would any pedestrian using a crosswalk, by yielding until the pedestrian has safely passed. Once the pedestrian has crossed, the driver may proceed, even if the beacon is still flashing. The devices are designed to increase yielding compliance and, according to statistics and pedestrians, they're working.
It's been about 90% compliance for motorists yielding to pedestrians since we have installed the rapid flashing beacons at various intersections in the city. It's comparable to a traffic light.
Oh, I go to Los Baños for swimming classes 3 times a week in the mornings, and I cross going there, and then I cross going back to my car again. So since they put that thing in, everybody stops.
I'm a regular tourist. I come through town 2 or 3 times a year, but I found them first at this intersection. And once I understood how they worked and that Santa Barbarans slowed down and stopped for them, I found them really easy and enjoyed using them to help walk the dog.
But remember, to reap the benefits of the rapid flashing beacons, you have to do one thing.
You got to use the button. Our people don't see it, I think.
And thanks to a new federal grant, the city will soon install rapid flashing beacons at 5 more busy intersections around town. They include State and Palo Colorado, State and Pedregosa, State and Islay, Cabrillo and Anacapa, and Cabrillo at Corona del Mar. Public Works staff stress these devices are not appropriate for every intersection. They also point out not everyone uses the beacons before crossing.
So a motorist should always anticipate that people might be in an intersection as they pass through, and to still be mindful of that.
Rapid flashing beacons benefit all modes of transportation. Since they are only utilized when a pedestrian is present, they don't unnecessarily inhibit the flow of traffic. And for pedestrians that have used them, it's the only way to go.
This is a way where pedestrians can get across easily, and it doesn't break up the small town experience that you're trying to preserve in Santa Barbara.
The new rapid flashing beacons will be installed this winter. Ever wonder what the top causes for traffic accidents in Santa Barbara are? What about how to make a right turn when there is a bike lane? To get the answers to these and other top transportation questions, our Chris Bell took a drive with someone who has a lot of experience with the rules of the road.
Whoa, let's go.
You got this,
Wrong way driver.
When it comes to driving and traffic safety, Mark Purcell has just about seen it all. He spent 28 years as a police officer, 5 of those as a traffic investigator, and currently he does law enforcement driver training at the Allen Hancock Public Safety Training Complex. So who better to ask for tips on how to safely circumnavigate the streets of Santa Barbara? We took a drive with Mark to get the lowdown on the top causes for accidents in the city and the best ways to avoid them.
In Santa Barbara, when I was working traffic, our big 3 causes of crashes were unsafe speed, failing to yield, and unsafe turning movements.
Unsafe speed is pretty self-explanatory, driving faster than limits or conditions permit. Failure to yield can happen in a number of ways.
If I'm driving down the street, you make a left turn in front of me and I have to speed up, slow down, or swerve in order to avoid hitting you outside of just traveling down the road in my lane at the correct speed, at the speed limit, then you violated my right-of-way. And they're usually the more significant crashes because they become right-angle impact crashes.
Unsafe turning movements can also occur in a variety of situations.
The unsafe turning movements are anything from driving down a one-way street and making an unsafe lane change, or making a left-hand turn from the right-hand lane on a one-way street, cutting somebody off, which is a really common one here in town.
Another common traffic accident here in town is one that doesn't even involve another driver. It's called a single vehicle collision, and it accounts for 1/3 of all crashes in Santa Barbara.
If they're not a DUI case, most of the time it's an inattention issue. Texting, cell phone, looking for something in the car, and then swerving and hitting something, either running into a parked car or going off the road and causing a crash.
Purcell says the vast majority of traffic accidents have one or both of the following in common: inattention or distraction, like that caused by cell phone use, and speed. And we're not just talking velocity, but the understanding of speed and its relationship to reaction time and stopping distance.
I think understanding your feet per second travel time is really important, and nobody really teaches it and nobody talks about it. Everything that we deal with is in miles per hour. Speed limits are miles per hour, speedometers are miles per hour, so everyone thinks 30 miles an hour is 30 miles an hour. How much roadway do you cover at 30 miles an hour?
To convert miles per hour to a more understandable feet per second, Purcell offers a simple formula. Take the speed and multiply by 1.5. So for example, a vehicle traveling 30 miles per hour covers 45 feet per second.
And most people don't understand that relationship to speed and how much road they're covering. You're driving down the street, you just bought your $5 Starbucks that you don't want to spill, and you're trying to find your cup holder in your car. How many seconds does it take you to do that at 45 feet per second if you're going 30 miles per hour? You're covering a lot of roadway.
But to figure out the distance it will take to stop, you also need to take reaction time into consideration. The commonly used range for perception reaction times is 1.5 to 2.5 seconds.
At 30 miles an hour, the best that you're going to be able to do is 109 feet to get your car stopped. It's really closer to 153, given that 1.5 seconds perception reaction time is really closer to 2 to 2.5 seconds because of everything going on in cars today.
To safely accommodate for that perception reaction time, Purcell recommends keeping a high visual horizon, paying attention as far down the road as you can, as well as using a tried and true rule of thumb, the 3-second rule, where you watch the vehicle in front of you pass an object and then count the time it takes for you to reach that object. If you're closer than 3 seconds, then back off until you reach a 3-second following distance.
If we use a 3-second follow distance, we're building in a buffer to where we're not going to hit somebody if they stop in front of us. So the 3-second rule applies to whatever speed you're going. It's not how many car lengths behind somebody, it's 3 seconds.
And remember, 3 seconds is for when conditions are good. If the road is wet or visibility is limited, You need to extend that following distance. These rules of thumb are useful for all modes of transportation. For instance, having a good idea of how far it's going to take a 4,000-pound vehicle to stop is pretty important to pedestrians crossing the street. Which brings us to another of Purcell's handy tips.
What I tell people to do is in Santa Barbara, most blocks are about 500 feet long. If the vehicle is in the first half of the block, then you can walk across the street. They've got over 250 feet to perceive and react to you and stop, which is plenty of time. If they're on your half of the block, simply let the vehicle go by and walk behind them.
We also asked Purcell to share the answers to some of the frequently asked questions he gets in his driver safety courses. One of the more popular, how to properly make a right-hand turn when there is a bike lane.
You're mandated to drive into the bike lane to make the turn. The purpose behind that is that if there's a bicyclist there, they have occupied the lane and have possession of the lane. So then you're supposed to move in behind them as opposed to coming and cutting them off.
So the first thing I should do is to check and see if there are any cyclists coming.
Correct.
Signal, and then I need to go where this is broken up.
Then you need to move into the bike lane and then make the right
turn.
Correct.
And here's another popular question Purcell likes to use to test his students' driving knowledge. What is the speed limit in town when there are no signs posted? Is it A, 25 miles per hour, B, 30 miles per hour, or C, 35 miles per hour?
By the municipal code, the speed limit in Santa Barbara is 25 miles per hour unless it's posted otherwise.
In the end, Purcell says the secret to safe transit is no secret at all.
I keep telling everyone there's a great new concept in defensive driving. It's called slow down.
For more helpful driving tips, check out the National Safety Council website at nsc.org. Stay tuned, we'll be right back with more Inside Santa Barbara.
We are in a serious drought, so it's time to get water-wise. Did you know that in Santa Barbara County, 60% of residential water use is used in gardens, and half that is wasted through overwatering and runoff? Take a day off from watering your landscape and only water your thirstiest plants, such as your lawn, no more than 2 days a week. Gold is the new green in Santa Barbara County. Your water provider is here to help. Visit waterwisesb.org for more information.
Welcome back. Even though we're experiencing drought conditions right now, when the rains do come, the Santa Barbara Creeks Division has concerns about certain substances ending up in our creeks, especially pesticides. Up next, producer Jeff Goodvin tells us what the city is doing to ensure our creeks stay clean.
Every year, after the first big rainfall, the City Creeks Division goes out and does on-site water quality tests in our area creeks.
And we do that because we're really looking for the worst case scenario, because we want to know what is getting in the creeks that we need to tell the community could be a problem.
The water samples are taken at 4 locations called integrator stations. These stations are just above sea level and are at points where runoff from the main watersheds are sure to flow. And the results from this year's tests raise some concern.
And we got detections for one of the neonics, imidacloprid, at each of those sites. And I was really surprised. That's never happened before. We've never had a positive result for for the same pesticide at all 4 of those sites.
Imidacloprid is one compound in the class of neonicotinoids that's widely used to kill pests. Neonics count for 40% of the global pesticide market. The pesticide is being associated with major bee die-offs around the U.S.
Having bees, being a beekeeper, I know the environmental impact that this class of pesticide can have on the bees, and I was concerned.
Imidacloprid is a neurotoxin and causes paralysis in target organisms. The pesticide also affects non-target insects with lethal and sublethal consequences.
And this, especially for honeybees, might affect their navigational abilities, their foraging behaviors, and can lead to eventually population declines.
There are 3 ways neonics are implemented. One way is by coating the seeds of certain crops like corn or canola. Another is by applying the pesticide to soil around a plant in what is called a soil drench. Lastly, the pesticide is sprayed directly on the plant.
Systemically or vascularly moves up through the plant, and then it comes out in the pollen and the nectar, and we know that that can be a very toxic environment for the bees. Not only for the foraging bees themselves, but then they take this imidacloprid back to the hive, and the concentrations build up over time in the hive itself to a level that they're finding to be problematic for the bees.
The median lethal dose of imidacloprid ranges from 5 to 70 picograms of active ingredient per bee. For comparison, the weight of the DNA of a human cell is about 7 picograms. Another problem is the pesticide's longevity. With frequent use accumulating over time, this pesticide can persist for 2 or 3 years. Studies in the Netherlands between 2003 and 2013 suggest that certain aquatic insect and bird populations diminished in areas where high concentrations of the pesticide were used, especially species living near surface waters such as creeks, ponds, and lakes.
And there are many species of birds that are almost exclusively feeding on insects, especially when they're feeding their young.
According to the U.S. EPA, the amount of pesticides found in the samples taken from the creeks pose no immediate threat to the creek's ecosystem. But it's the lower-level chronic threats by imidacloprid that troubles officials at the Creeks Division.
Very recently, it's come out that the indirect effects can start at concentrations much lower than these toxicity thresholds and at the levels that right in range with what we have found in the creeks.
One aspect that has the Creeks Division concerned is where the pesticide is coming from. Used primarily in ag settings, imidacloprid is widely used in home lawn care, flea and tick treatment for domestic pets, and termite control.
But as I mentioned, we found it in the Laguna Channel watershed. That watershed is exclusively urban, and so we know that we're getting it from some of the urban areas.
So most of this is coming from residential use and oftentimes abuse or misuse. The EPA has a label on all of these neonic products that say do not use when the plant is in bloom or when bees are present.
Even people who practice organic gardening and who never use pesticides, they might be purchasing plants at a home and garden center where the seeds or the roots were treated with this material.
There are several ways to rid your garden and lawns of neonics. One way is to do research and look into organic or non-toxic products.
There's a great resource called ourwaterourworld.org that lists a ton of different pesticides and kind of better alternatives to use that are friendlier to the environment and to water quality.
Another way to avoid using imidacloprids is talking with your local nursery professional.
When you're at the nursery buying plants, talk to the staff and ask them if the plants have been pre-treated with things like imidacloprid and other pesticides. You can also, if you're planting seeds, make sure to buy organic seeds that haven't been pre-treated.
On a global scale, the eradication of neonics is starting to take form. The European Union is in the middle of a 2-year moratorium banning the use of neonics on flowering crops. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Agency seeks to phase out neonicotinoid pesticides on federal wildlife lands by January 2016. The California legislature has passed Bill AB 1789, authored by Assemblymember Doss Williams, that provides a timeline for governmental reevaluation of neonic compounds. This bill is now headed to the governor's desk awaiting his signature.
The amount that it has been used in agricultural and urban settings has grown so quickly that we really are doing an experiment on our ecosystem, and we really do need to bring the levels of this compound down.
Bee and other pollinators are vital to the proliferation of domestic crops as well as wild plants.
So we know the importance of the pollinators. We also understand that there is a need for the commercial agricultural practices, but we feel that there should be a little bit more of what's called IPM, or integrated pest management, with less dependence on all of these chemicals.
So I hope everyone will take action and know that we're finding it in the creeks. We're finding it in levels that are not acceptable, and we've got to try to bring it down as a community.
To learn more about the quality of our water, visit sbcreeks.com. We all know that we're in a stage 2 drought and that saving water is critical. That's why the city has created a way to help water customers with irrigation meters to track their water usage and adjust their watering based on the weather. Out of more than 27,000 water meters in the city of Santa Barbara, there are 807 irrigation meters for customers with larger landscapes. These tend to be commercial properties, schools, or homeowners associations, although residential customers with large landscapes can benefit from an irrigation meter too. In July 2014, the City Council adopted a policy creating a new rate structure for water customers that have these separate water meters for irrigation. This rate structure allows for the customer and the city to determine a water budget for that specific landscape.
So a landscape water budget helps us determine the appropriate amount of water to apply to a landscape to keep it healthy and beautiful. It's based on 3 factors: the amount of irrigated area in the landscape, the types of plants in the landscape, and weather data. And it changes monthly based on weather conditions. Each budget is unique to a specific landscape based on that landscape's unique characteristics.
City water conservation staff have been working towards landscape budgets for several years. Landscape budgets are considered a best management practice by the California Urban Water Conservation Council. The goal is to incentivize customers to water efficiently.
Well, water is a resource, and like money in the bank, if you don't know how much is in there and you can't keep track of how much you're withdrawing, there's no balance. So with an irrigation budget, what that allows us to do is we come out and we actually measure the square footage of the property. We differentiate between the high water using grass and all the rest of the property like shrubs and low water using plants. We take the total on that, and every month what happens is that the billing department is given what's called the ETO, or the evapotranspirative rate. Basically, it's what is the weather doing? You can use the weather data and the type of plants and the size of your landscape, and you can know exactly how much water you should be applying, knowing that, say, we're going into winter, you're going to be able to reduce the amount of water that you use and only apply what the plants actually need to be healthy and happy.
No matter what your water budget is, you're only billed for the water you use. If your usage is below the monthly budget level, all use will be billed at the Tier 1 rate. However, if your usage exceeds the monthly water budget, all use above the budgeted amount is billed at the more expensive Tier 2 rate.
The only way that you can really monitor and adjust your watering for your plants is to know how much you're applying. And if you don't have a separate meter, you're having to try and estimate, well, how much did we use inside? And, well, we had company, and then we were on vacation. So if you have a separate meter that waters, maybe you have an acre or you have 2 acres of land, you can look at that, you can run each zone and see how many gallons you used in a minute. Do that for all the different zones. The average lawn zone is using between 13 and 16 gallons per minute. So when you set up your budget personally and you're looking at where can I cut down, if you think, wow, my lawn's using 16 gallons a minute and we're in a drought, well, that's the first place I'm going to cut down. I can cut down 10 minutes and save 160 gallons. If I cut out 1 shower a week at 10 minutes, at 1.5 gallons, I'm going to save, what, 15 gallons? Much more impact if you're doing it in the landscape.
When the city comes out to your property, staff will measure all the irrigated area using a laser survey tool and geographic information systems, or GIS. These high-tech tools allow for an efficient way to verify the exact square footage that is being watered. Once this data has been collected and the type of plant materials and weather data are figured into the equation, you have your water budget.
As we get deeper into our hot summer, the plant's needs for water increase, and so you would be given a budget that takes that into consideration, so that, as you get July, your budget will be a little bit larger to make up for the fact that there's no precipitation in July.
The city has tools available for customers to help them properly manage their water budgets, such as getting a free water checkup to review your sprinkler timer, using the watering calculator and the weekly watering percent adjust, upgrading your sprinkler timer to a smart irrigation controller using the city rebate program, and encouraging your landscaper to manage your landscape to a budget.
In general, what we're seeing actually is an increase in interest from our customers that have large landscapes to get a separate irrigation meter, so that if they have one meter that's serving their home and their landscape is large, they're oftentimes getting a lot of water usage in that high tier 3 rate. And so if they separate and they get a separate irrigation meter, they can manage their water more efficiently, and it actually helps lower their bill. So we've seen an increase in those meters as the rates have gone up with the drought.
These irrigation meters are a win-win for everybody, saving water for the community and money for the customer. For more information, visit santabarbaraca.gov/water. Well, that does it for this episode. If you have questions or comments about the show, you can give us a call at 564-5311. You can also watch the show online at citytv18.com. I'm your host, Becky Davis. Remember to get involved inside Santa Barbara.